So we actually do have notes. Albert and I shared some notes back and forth. I'm not going to try to read them as we go through. We're going to go from memory because my eyes are bad and I don't feel like wearing glasses. So any dates or anything I get wrong, please feel free to correct me. It'll be a good back and
I
forth.
probably won't remember either.
And anybody out here, you can correct me also. I won't be offended. But your start, University of Pennsylvania, master's in electrical engineering, I believe.
Just a bachelor.
Bachelor's, okay. I was trying to make you sound better, though.
No, I don't.
This is the time to sell it. When you left there, you went immediately to MOS Technology, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So were other companies looking for you, or were you just not interested?
They were looking for me, okay? I mean, I'll give you the background, okay, why I became an engineer, and it's, I mean, I have a vivid memory of when I was literally 7 years old, and I would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning like all kids do, and I'd walk out and there was this test pattern on the screen, all right? And it was just amazing to me, like, how did that get there? I mean, there's just rabbit ears, and how did it get there? And it just fascinated me about how this happened. So just, I always was curious, and it was just something I really wanted to know how that worked. So over the years, I continued to work in sciences, and I was interested in chemistry and electricity. And so when I got to school, I went, okay, I started out in my freshman year of chemistry and electricity, and then I stayed with electrical engineering and learned semiconductor physics, because literally I was the last class that got taught tubes in the engineering class. We had about 6 weeks of tubes, but they had the semiconductor physics, and I took analog circuitry and digital circuitry design while I was there. How I ended up at Commodore is because of the fact that I joined a frat, and one day there was a knock on the door. And a guy walks in and he says, I used to be a brother here. And there was a hurricane that came through in 1971 or 2, I guess it was. And it knocked my house down that it was building. And I used to be a member here. Do you guys have a room I could rent for a while? Just before I had to rebuild my house? Guy's named Jim Donaghy. Anyway, I said, sure. So guess where he worked? MOS Technology. So he told me about all of the things that he was doing for semiconductor design. He was a chip designer. And I just was like, that was it. Everything I took from that moment on was for that. And when I got out, I did apply to Philco Ford. They were interested. And I went back and I went to MOS and showed mine. But I was very well prepared for that interview. So they did hire me, and that's how I got there.
So when you showed up there around 75?
Yeah, it was into 74. Yeah.
74, 75?
Yeah, right.
When you first started there, what were you doing? You weren't doing chip design right out of the gate.
I was put in the product engineering role and doing failure analysis in the fab. So I learned how fab really worked in terms of what, how the semiconductor physics background was. But still, it was just learning all the pieces and what could go wrong, and really getting the fundamentals of design and how that interaction occurred, okay? But my goal was to be a design engineer, and fortunately, I had an opportunity because they were doing memory design, okay? And I was very interested in, I just wanted to do design of some kind. And so I got involved in doing ROMs, okay? And my first, I did a little shift register chip actually for a calculator for the memory. You remember 10 memory calculators? I did a chip that did that. And then I did a 16K ROM. Oh.
That was a big deal back then, though.
Oh, it was a big one. Yeah, we were on par with the rest of the world in terms of the density. So that was my very first solo design that I was responsible for, and I put a differential amplifier in there that was new and interesting. And so that's what I cut my teeth on after about a year in the product engineering area. And that was a good training, but by 75, end of 75, I was doing my own designs.
And you were doing calculator chip designs at that point, right?
Yes, and I like to say we were doing them with stone knives and bear claws. Because the crazy stuff we did back then, so you would do a design, and think about it, this was really before computers. We did have an IBM 360 downstairs in the basement that we would use for simulation, and the simulations were literally on a TTY teletype machine. It was crazy. I think about it, and so that's all we had, and everything was done by hand. And We did have actually, you could put the layout into the computer system. So you would draw that by hand, and then somebody would digitize that, all the 4 layers or 6 layers, and then they would go ahead and then be able to plot that out on a huge pen plotter. And then they had this, that would then go down to the fab area where they would make the plates. And those things were, there was this giant size, like, I think of like a 12-foot by 12-foot pool table. And it had an XY CNC kind of a thing on it where they put a knife in it and they lay out a ruby lith, which is basically Milo with this red sticky coating stuff on it, and it would cut each layer individually. And then we would have what we used to call a peeling party. Literally, you get 4 guys around the table with tweezers and pull the layers up that would be exposed for each of the layers, okay? And then they take that giant one and then put that on a camera system with a bellows that was the size of a room, and then shrink that down about 100 to 1, and then do it again and shrink it again to finally get to the final plate. So, but it was all, think about that, you're literally peeling the layers out. That's why I was saying we're doing it with, stone knives. Yeah. It was crazy.
That's great.
Yeah, but it was, I'm amazed we got anything to work, actually.
So, Al, moving on, by about 1976, a couple things happened. One was that's when Commodore International purchased MOS. I think agreement
75,
in principle,
it's roughly 75, 76.
Yeah,
and
agreement in
75.
principle earlier, and I think it was finalized in 76. That's when you did another chip. So you get a lot of credit for the VIC chip, and that's like, oh, your first video chip. You did a Pong chip, and I don't know how that came about. Was that an MOS thing? I know Commodore sold it.
Yeah.
If you've seen the Commodore 2000K and 3000H Pong consoles, those were chips that Al created. And how'd that come about? Was that your idea?
No, I'm always interested in video games, and I'd like to play the Atari Pong, but it wasn't one that I initiated, okay? It was something that did come in, I guess, for the sales group, and that came in to me, and I said, sure, it's video, I love it. Let me give it a shot. And it's pretty simple, actually. I mean, you just, a couple of things are going up and down and one moving object. It's really more processor intensive than the video. So as long as you put something out there, it's going to put on the screen. And I actually did a little card that would be just showed how it would work. And I did tell the story, but basically we put it on a screen one time at a friend's house, and Father asked me, geez, I'm not going to burn my TV set. Oh, no. We left it on. It burned the TV set. He was not happy. But yeah, it came out, and by that time I was ready. It sort of just went out, and they made a product with it. So it was a very short-lived product.
A Christmas run. They did
That
exactly
was it.
one run of those.
Yeah.
Now, the 7601 itself, was there video generated from that, or was that just a microcontroller?
It was a micro. No video. The video was externally done.
Got it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because it was also meant that they were thinking about making an LCD thing as well. That was one of the That's why it wasn't any. The video, the output was basic, and then you could put different control mechanisms for what kind of a display you were going to use. All right. Okay. Yeah, I remember the very first version of that. There was a bug in this. I told Bill about this, but there was a bug in the software that basically, if you played the soccer game in it, there was a soccer game in it, and if you played it to the end, it would freeze and would blank out, and the screen would go black. So literally, we jury rigged something on the original thing so that before it would go blank, we'd fix that up and freeze it so that the screen would continue to show the display.
Nice.
But that's the kind of stuff you did back then, just put some glue on it somehow to make it work.
And MOS was selling to external customers at the time still, so that was also, the 7600 were sold to Allied Leisure. They were in a bunch of Allied Leisure handheld consoles back then. And I don't know if there were anything else. So
let me tell you that the Atari one is an interesting one.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, I was going back to my ROM background now. So I graduated. I did a 32K ROM, and then I did a 64K ROM. Okay. Now, which going up the ladder, just like Moore's law, you're doubling. So Atari, if you remember the old Atari 2600, they had a maximum of 32K of address space that they could address. And that was it. And Atari wanted to do the old Asteroids game, the Asteroid game of the arcade fame. But they couldn't fit it in a 32K, all right? So somehow it got back into our group, and I said, oh, you know what? I could take our 64K and put an automatic bank switch in it. That is, if you ever hit this one address, it's automatically going to flip out to the other 32K, all right? And so we banged that out. It worked. Atari put us Asteroids in it. We sold 6 million of them.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it was crazy. So that was my first real foray into like designing a chip and helping the company make a lot of money on it.
Yeah, they absolutely
But that
did.
gave me some credibility. Okay, so I was able to get a little bit of independence to say, let's do something else.
So if I can move on to the VIC chip next, the 6560. Now the VIC-20 computer didn't come out until 80, the 1001 and 80, and the VIC-20 and 81.
Yeah, 79.
You actually started the VIC chip in 76, and I think
76.
finished it in 77.
Correct, yes.
So the original plan was not to make a computer around it. The original plan was to sell the VIC chip to console manufacturers.
I loved video games, and it was what I wanted to do. And so that once I had a little bit of credibility from the Atari project, I proposed, hey, I want to do a really good video chip that can do really color and background stuff and really give some capability to. And
the thing we were talking about up there that I was fascinated by, do you want to go into the details of that? What you did to make the proposal?
yeah, well, everybody looked at me and said, are you sure you can do this? I said, yeah, I can do it. And they said, okay, prove it. So I ended up building a PC board that was literally 18 inches on a side with about 100 CTL chips on it. So it could do the display and the color, okay? And I just remember it was like midnight. I was working like a maniac. It was midnight one night. We got it all running, and the software came up, and we had a display with color, okay? And finally, everybody believed that, okay, they let me go. And that was kind of the nice thing about Commodore at the time. It was a bit of a Wild West. Well, the whole, everything back in the 80s was, everybody was just going like crazy in different directions. But Commodore did allow you to experiment a little bit. And if you again, had a little credibility, you could get out there. And I proposed this to Jack, and he said, okay, do it. I can still remember it. He said, okay, do it. I was like, sort of prove it. And that's what started the whole process. But I can still remember, okay, and then the guy was programming it. Basically, we had a little boat that ran across the screen, and we shot missiles at it. That was the first program that was done with the big prototype. Yeah, but that was the beginning of the whole thing in the end of 75 or 76.
So that prototype did work well enough that you were able to do animations and everything on it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was almost what, the only thing it didn't have as much memory. You can only do a couple of lines of display. Okay. So, but it basically proved the whole concept so that I could.
You're able to prove the concept that you could go with the real chip.
Exactly.
So what was it like designing the real chip? Because, Commodore was a financially successful company by then.
Yes.
They spent heavily on R&D. Did you have state-of-the-art?
Well, we had state-of-the-art back then wasn't too.
Yeah. the state-of-the-art for that time.
We had computer-generated schematics, okay, and layout, okay. But again, you had to draw them. They were drawing the layout on there by now. But then the schematics too were originally. I was still using a logic template on Mylar to draw the schematics. And at that moment, there was no other way to do it. And then I still, in both cases, you had like a timing diagram, and you drew those out by hand. And I had like a 12-foot long sheet of paper, a Mylar, along the wall with each of the different signals showing one frame of a TV from one state, the vertical sync, and so on and so on. The big thing that was really the breakthrough was direct DMA. And not a big deal today, but back then there was a nice quirk in the 6502 that it only actually needed information on the falling edge of a phase 1 and a phase 2 clock. It needed the information at the end of the phase 1. It would put out the addresses at phase 1 and then expect data at the end of phase 2. But that really, if you had fast enough memory, you really didn't need phase 1. You could eliminate phase 1 and use that for another access to memory. And that was the real thing that changed how we could get more video on the screen quickly and update. Because on the phase 1, the 500 nanoseconds of phase 1, I would do the video chip would access it, and on the 500 nanoseconds of phase 2, the processor would access it. So you could be real-time updating while the video display was happening without interfering with anything. So it was truly DMA at the time, direct access, and that really allowed things to propel very quickly and really have the processor to do a lot more rather than like in Atari stuff, you had to wait for vertical sync, and then they would redraw as many things as they could, get set up, and then just play it out. So they're really, now the processor could be doing it at the same time video was. So that was a key piece to the architecture.
Mm-hmm. So you finished the chip, and you had this nice working chip, and then the hope is you're going to sell it to industry. So right. I'm assuming that, like, we all heard what Chuck Peddle did when he was trying to sell the 65 too. Nationwide tour, let us prove this thing works. Right. Was it similar for the 6560?
Yes, I went on a lot of conventions trying to peddle it, and I designed a board that has 6502 in it, the VIC-1 chip, some memory, and it would show some display capability, some alphanumerics, a little game stuff and color, but we could never get. For 2 years, we couldn't get anybody to bite. I mean, we showed it to so many different companies, and everybody was interested, but we never could get anybody to bite. And the next phase of that story now is that that's when Bob Yanes entered the picture, okay? So I was interviewing for people to join MOS, or Commodore at the time, and he was graduating from Villanova, and he came in for an interview, and I showing him around, and I showed him the VIC chip board and the process, the whole system. And he says, "Wow, that's really cool. Would you mind if I took one of those and I do my senior project on it?" I said, "Sure, here, have it." Okay. So anyway, he basically took it, and through his senior project, he turned it into a little computer. Put a little operating system into it, and then was able to type on it and do some things, okay? So he comes back, and he joins us in May. So that was, I think it was, he interviewed probably in January or something like that, and we were going to have him join us. So he comes back in May after he graduates, and he shows us his senior project, and we go, "Wow, that's interesting. It's not a video game, but it might have some interest here." Because at the same time, Chuck Peddle and his group was working out in Santa Clara to do
the toy.
The toy, exactly.
Which, with the backronym of The Other Intellect.
Right, yes. That was a follow-up to the PET, if you will. And so anyway, Jack Tramiel comes out, and we show him this Bob Senior project, and he got all excited. He goes, "That's what I want." And this became the basis for the feud between Chuck Peddle and I. Not a feud, but just sort of like he was not happy with having to do the VIC, which became the VIC-20. So ended up that they took what Bob had done and the VIC-1 chip, and then basically that moved to Santa Clara, and they then did the VIC-20, so that they put in that's where the operating system and all that came from.
So if we step back to before that, when they were working on the toy, which the toy came before Bob Yanes's MicroPet idea, there were two chips you worked on for that, the 6562 and 6564. They were supposed to be 40-column versions of the original VIC. What issues did you have with those? I mean, why didn't we end up seeing those?
They never got past the real, like, I call it concept stage. We never got to hard design on those, okay? And they never hit fab because it was never clear that where the toy was going and the specs that were coming out of it. So that, I mean, literally you have to be ahead of, it takes a year to do a chip at least. And so you really have to harden up your specs and know exactly what you want and be willing to wait a year. And they were moving very quickly. And so it never got to the point where it said, okay, how do we do this? Okay. And it wasn't clear that they were going to have what the display requirements were going to be at that time. So it never got to the point where something was going to seriously be resourced.
Okay. And we already talked about the fact you were trying to sell it to external companies. I don't even know if you were aware. It was actually used in a single coin-op arcade game called Attack UFO.
I did not know that.
I did not either. And if that ends up not being true, my friend Steve Gray told me that and sent me pictures.
Oh, well.
It's on the internet, and you know everything on the internet's true. But
It very well could be. I mean,
Yeah.
we were trying to sell them, and if they were available, if
If
somebody
you,
wanted to buy one, they would have sold it to them.
anyone here who is bored, if you look up Attack UFO, it was a coin-op game. It apparently used a 6560 chip as its basis. So I was completely unaware of that. And if that's wrong, Steve Gray, that is your fault. I blame you. Because I never heard about it before that. So if we move on, we've got the Bob Yanis micropet concept, and that one was decided over, I believe, Bill Seiler's G-Job, because they felt, the West Coast guys felt that the micropet wasn't fit to be shown at a CES.
Right.
So theirs,
That's, again, the feud I was mentioning.
theirs was more complete. So yeah, there was kind of a feud between West and East Coast. It was not friendly competition.
It wasn't. We weren't too nasty to each other, but it was like, okay, we were vying for resources in a company to do what you wanted to do, and so they had a vision of where they wanted to go, and it wasn't what we had created.
So
that
we
was
know
really
history tells us Jack Trammell picked the Bob Yanis design, and that's what became the VIC-20.
Yes.
Did they keep working on the toy, or did they just cancel?
I am not aware that it got, because I think it got bumped, and Jack said, I want this. This is what I want to sell. And so they didn't get resourced at that point.
So the folks who were working on the toy then got pulled over to work on
Correct.
the VIC-20.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you remember from VIC-20 production? Or were you not involved in that? You did the chip and just walked away.
I did the chip. Well, I mean, obviously, I did the design of the board that Bob worked with, and so we basically just passed that to Bill. Bill Seiler, they were a competent crew. I mean, they knew what they were doing. So once I had done that, it was like, okay, great. The VIC-1 found a home, which is what really I was looking for, somebody to do. You know, you want to. I mean, it's hard to put a couple of years of your life into something to see it not used. So it was really nice to see something come of it, okay? But once that moved, I was saying, okay, now I want to do the next one.
So that next one, as I recall, it was you and Charlie Winterble met in early '81 because the VIC-1000 was already out, the VIC-20 was just being released, and that's when you started talking about the VIC-40, I believe.
Yes, it was going to be, that was right, VIC-20, VIC-40. And it was basically that again, the VIC-20 was great, it was fun, but it still couldn't do really good video games, even though it was a computer. I mean, you couldn't move. I mean, the processing power just wasn't there to move things around the screen radically and quickly and be able to do collision detection and have a really incredible game experience, okay? So it was still what I wanted to do. And so that, in really the 78, 79 period, as soon as the VIC-20 was clear it was going to be a hit, that's when we started conversing about it and saying, okay, what do we do next, okay? And then Bob Yanis was there, and we said, okay, we sat down and laid out what we wanted to do, okay? And that's how that happened. And so it was, I guess but it was 79 we talked about it, and it was 80-ish when we started working on it, yeah.
So Bob Russell described it as there's been a lot of talk that said marketing drove what the 64 became. Bob Russell said, no, it was a Skunk Works project. It was a bunch of engineers that
there
got
was no
together,
marketing.
and we decided what it was going to do.
Yeah, I mean, we literally decided the specifications. I mean, we had limitations. I mean, the chips couldn't be 200 mils on the side because that's about as big as we could make that would yield anything reasonable. And so we had, how much could we fit into a chip that was that big? And so we knew we had the VIC-20. I knew I wanted to add more characters on the display. I knew I wanted to put sprites into it. Bob loved music, and he said, I want to put a synthesizer in it. And so that all was outlined by me, Bob, Charlie, and folks. I mean, there was no marketing involved in that. And then I now remember, Jack came back and he would spend a week or two at MOS and then leave for a month or two. And we presented it to him. We said, this is what we want to do next. And just like he said, when I did the VIC-1 chip, he said, do it. And then that meant you could do it, and that was it. And I remember a accounting story where I would ask for things that I needed to get done, and accounting would hold me up, and I would go down and I'd say, listen, okay, and this is, you'll know this story, Bill, the JTI win card. So you would basically go, because they would hold it up, and I go, listen, I need to have this released. You got to go pay for this, get this PO out there. And he says, wow. And I said, listen, I can call Jack now and he can tell you, or you can do it. and that's the way it really was to get things done out there. It really was funny.
So we'll spend a ton of time on the VIC-2, obviously, but you did things on the C64 other than that. I think you and Charlie started the 6526, if I'm not mistaken, the CIA chip.
Yeah, so that was because there just wasn't enough. It wasn't enough I/O, and the serial port structure wasn't good enough. So we had to bang that out. That was a really short design because we took what Bill Mensch had done on the 6522.
6522, right?
Right, and we just added some features to that, which were
And
pretty
fixed
straightforward.
the shift register.
Right, we fixed the shift register.
One, yeah.
I remember that. Yes, I forgot about that. Yeah.
So that, and it was ROM chips, because you said you were making ROM chips, and it was the ROM chips they sold to Atari. You used those for the character ROMs.
Correct. Yep.
Which ended up being a problem. We can get to that later.
Yeah.
And what else did you have a finger in that? Other
Well, I had
than
to do the
obviously VIC chip?
6510, okay, because we wanted an I/O port that was directly on the chip, so we could manage all the bank switching that needed to be done because we were limited to the 64K address space. So you had you had the ROM in there, and then originally it was going to be a 16K board system, okay, and in the middle of the design, Jack said, "Hey, 64K is where it's at. The price is going to come down. We ought to design that for 64K and figure it out." And we went, okay, we'll figure it out. More memory's better than less, in my opinion, better games. So, but that it required bank switching. So the fastest way we could do bank switching was actually to put it on the 6510. We needed more I/O anyway, so it was easy just to open that up and put an I/O port in there.
I didn't realize it was you who did that.
Oh, yeah.
Learned something. That's great. Okay.
Little design. It was one of those ones where, okay, put an I/O port's not too hard. We had a good team of layout designers and stuff that worked fast.
And also for memory mapping, the PLA, which was, I guess, the original was Signetics S100.
I think so, yes.
And it was Bob Yanis who wrote the equations for that.
Yes.
Which probably does move us to the VIC chip, which was you. So what can you tell us about the VIC chip? What did you learn from doing the original VIC for when you did the VIC-2?
Well, I was able to take all of the, I call it the frame logic and the character fetching logic. I mean, looking back on it, I kept that 8-character little method of painting the screen, which is obviously, I always wanted to try to do it as a full bitmap, but it just wasn't possible. There wasn't enough memory and speed to do it that way. So I had to stay with the character-based RAM system. Okay, and that was what I pulled over from the VIC-1 into the VIC-2. So that was the basis. And then we had to go to 40 characters, and so we had to up the speed of everything in terms of how fast it would run. And then the sprites. That was literally, the sprites probably take up 2/3 of the chip.
I was just looking at, you have your thing there, I guess if you could show.
Yeah. This is, I am not a person who actually who was into the nostalgia stuff, but this is the only thing I have. This is the original VIC-2 plot that was done. Literally, I had a 12 by 12 foot plot of this that I crawled around on the floor to check the logic, because there was no automatic checking back then. So you checked your schematic against the layout point by point. Now the good news is a lot of it was step functions, okay, memory cells. You only checked one of them, make sure it was right, and then you could move on. But I mean, you have down here, this is all the sprite logic down in here. Okay, and this is the sprite collision detection. This is the memory area for the sprites and the characters. This up here is the color generation area. So yeah, and I can still remember the photo lab really being pissed at us because of the fact we put our initials on the chip in metal. Yeah, so it was the 2 layout designers, myself, Dave DiOrio, and Jim Redfield. We were the people who were responsible for that. But yeah, so it was really the sprites were the hard part of that, and how to make that all work.
So you got, I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about the VIC-2 specifically before I move on.
Well, specifically is that the original design that I did is one more last story. We're going to put that to bed then. The original design I did was based off of the color clock at 14 megahertz, which you divide by 3, you have to get 3.5, which was the color carrier back then. I can't believe that stuff actually worked. But that's what the designers of color TVs did. So anyway, I simply took that clock and divided it by 14 essentially to get the main color. Divide by 4 to get the 3.5, and we were running 1.7 megahertz, of which the processor was running at about 8 kilohertz, and so was the VIC. But that was the speed. I could only get 36 characters on the screen. Okay, and that's what this version did. And we took it to a CES in 1982, January, and that's the version we showed, okay? And I was still annoyed the fact that it wouldn't do 40 characters because it was supposed to be the VIC 40. And so when we got back in January, I made a change to the chip so that I could have a separate color frequency and a separate video frequency, so I could up it to 1 megahertz, okay? So we did that design, went through the fab, it came out, and I plugged it in, and it worked, except for the fact it had this shimmer, because the dot clock and the color clock were not synchronized, and you would get this fluttering on the screen, and it was a real oh shit moment. and so there was a guy by the name of Bob Simons. He saved me immensely. He said, "Oh, we can fix that with a phase lock loop." Okay, and we took the color frequency and we made the 2 megahertz lock sync with that, and it solved the problem. Okay, and I can still remember going into Jack's office when he came in and he started screaming at me. "You could have risked this whole company. What were you thinking? Did you have a backup plan?" I said, "Yeah, I wasn't going to fail." Anyway, but that was the sort of the end of that, and that's
So, but it really wasn't, though, because it went to market, and everybody was happy, and they sold a cajillion of them,
Yes.
and then they found the sparkle bug.
yes.
And that was largely attributed to, they thought it was your video chip causing it, but it was not.
Yep. It was the ROM.
It was instead your ROM.
Right. It was my ROM. And what was going on there was that there was again, and you think about this, we had a situation where we're trying to run that fast and running really a megahertz or 2 megahertz, my goodness. Back then it was fast. And in order to get the ROM to run fast enough, I had a pre-charge section in the address decoder. And what would happen was, hey, if everything was great, as long as the addresses came out and didn't glitch. And somehow, every once in a while, the processor would glitch its address, and it would start the pre-charge because the pre-charge was based on an address change. So if the address changed, I said, "Oh, okay, I got to change," and I would pre-charge everything and then hit it with the new address. If it glitched, I would start that process, and if it changed again, it would get confused.
Yeah.
And that's how the sparkle happened. So
And there was sparkles on the screen, but they would actually be detected by the VIX collision detection.
Yes,
So
because
would
it
actually
thought it was
interfere with
getting a
games.
bad piece of data, and it says, "Okay, yeah, this is what exactly." Yeah, that's
And now those ROM chips, you had already sold like 3 million of them to Atari.
right. It wasn't a problem. It just whatever happened. You know, I was gone by then. Okay, I left Commodore, but
That wasn't why you left, though, right?
no, that was not why I left.
After the C64 went live, obviously tremendous success. I mean, that is really what propelled Commodore into the stratosphere. That took them up over $1 billion in revenue.
Yes,
in
it did,
84. Before you left Commodore, though, you proposed, I think it was called the C80.
I was going to do the Commodore 80. That's right.
And what was your proposal, and what came of that?
Okay, that was where I remember this vividly because I mean it was CES of '82 and so over the next 3 or 4 months, that's what we started to gravitate towards. Okay, that one's done. Let's do the next one. And so we put together a proposal to do the Commodore 80, which 80 characters couldn't be done on a home color TV set. There was just not enough. So it had to be a built-in display. And clearly you had to have a disk drive. Okay, guys, you got to have a disk drive. And to do decent games, you got to be color. So we need a built-in color. gee, this is 1982. What does that sound like? It's the early Mac, okay? Yeah. And that's what I wanted to do. And this is where, when a company gets bigger, like Commodore then was, and was very, really just people, crazy number of people all of a sudden involved. But I still remember Jack going, well, a computer's just a big calculator. This is, you need a word processor, a spreadsheet, some PowerPoint, and a couple. And what more do you need? So I pitched it to him in the June CES, or might be Comdex. It might be Comdex, and yeah, because I remember going from California. I think it was Comdex, and there was Comdex and CES. CES was in Chicago, Comdex was in Dallas, Texas at the time, and we were flying back and forth between the two shows. And I was pitching him this the whole time, and I remember at the end of the thing, he turned around. He was sitting in the front seat of the car on the way back, and I was sitting in the back, and he turned around and he said, "That's it. I made a decision. We're going to do the +4." And I went, "No, I'm not." I just thought to myself, "Oh, I got to get out of here. That he's not going to let me do what I want to do." And so that was the reason that I left.
Is that how you? So that pushed you out the door then?
Yeah, in September, I just said I wanted to do that, and I left in September. I also had another dream. I was going to have my own company by the time I was 30. And I left 2 weeks before my 30th birthday.
Oh, you timed it perfect.
Yeah. That was a dream I had. And I tried to get funding for the Commodore 80, and I did have a term sheet from Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield and Byers, which is the big VC firm in California. And I had a term sheet from them in about 3 weeks, and this is the end of 82 now. But 3 weeks before they're supposed to fund us, me, Bob, and Charlie, Dave John Don Doer, who was one of the big guys, he flew out and said, "I'm sorry, we're going to pull the term sheet. Commodore's got the low end, Compact's got the middle, IBM's got the high end. There's no room for anybody else." I was like, what do I do? My God, got a wife, kids, and how am I? And that's how Ensoniq was born, because we had the video chip started, and the audio chip was further along, and we just said, okay, I got to eat. So we turned it, we went and finished the audio chip, and that became Ensoniq.
So stepping back to two more things. One, only because I forgot. I mentioned earlier the toy computer, TOI. The other intellect was a backronym given to it by Chuck Peddle. But there was a second backronym given to it by Robert Russell. He called it Toll of Idiots. So it was the warring factions between the people working on the back then. But it was got to be the funniest thing Bob Russell did in his time there. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah.
The other one, Albert, you were working on a project to convert an Atari 2600 into a computer. And I guess the idea behind that is people already had these Atari 2600s. There were a zillion of them on the market. Right. It'd be a nice Christmas thing to be able to say, hey, you just plug this in and your Atari 2600 is a computer. Mm-hmm. How did that come about? Was that your idea, or did the company approach you? It was
actually Charlie. Okay, and this is when we walked out of Commodore, and he had an idea that said, "Gee, why don't we make an Atari 2600 into a VIC-20?" And so we did a little prototype that essentially was going to be a keyboard that slipped over the entire case of a 2600 with a through slot for the game. Okay, and so if an Atari 2600 would work on, you had to update the display information at vertical blanking time, and then the processor would then be able to access that information and spew it out. It was just how fast the processor could access the information and stuff it into a shift register. That's how it worked. So if you had simply the RAM set up, and so what I said is, oh, gee, all I have to do is create a barrier between the two. During vertical blanking, another processor could set up the RAM, and then when the Atari processor comes back on, all it'll do is just feed that RAM out. So essentially, the Atari 2600 became the video display manager, and I added another processor to it. Okay, so we went out and we showed this to Atari, and they loved it, and they basically gave us a licensing agreement to go ahead and do that. Now, do I want to tell the rest of that story?
The rest of the part is the best part.
So we had a prototype, and all I had was a little processor and a ROM on a little board, but I couldn't really sell that to somebody and get a lot of money for it. So basically what I did was I took 3 cartridges, plastic cartridges, and glued them together, and I put the board in there, and I added weights to it. and a plug that you had to plug into the wall that went nowhere. Because I pulled the power out of the 2600, right? So we went out there, we had all the execs there, and because obviously I had a little reputation that I could go on from the Commodore stuff, so they invited us in. So I plugged in the Atari 2600, plugged this thing in, and up comes a 20-character display. Okay, that worked fine, and so basically they went, wow. And I said, okay, and I unplugged it and pulled it and put it in my pocket. And we got a deal. And that was the very first thing we did with our Commodore, but Jack was really mad at me, and he sued us. So fortunately, we won. It cost me a lot of money, but I did win the suit, fortunately.
Good. I wasn't going to go into that, but I'm glad you did.
Right.
How did Sonic come about then?
Well, that's because of the fact that it's actually, I think I got my dates wrong, because 82 we did the thing with Atari, and then that finished up in the spring of 82. Atari never produced it. Spring of 83, and then we started working on the Commodore 80, and so that was the end of 83 that the thing was pulled from funding. So Bob was working on the audio chip, I was working on the video chip. The video chip was a lot more expensive and complicated, and Bob loved music, and we said, hey, what can we do? So I took the same architecture. What we did was we took the same architecture we did with video chip, where we flip-flop Phi 1 and Phi 2, and instead of storing video information, we stored audio information. So you could record a piano note and put it in there, and the chip would then interpolate to get different notes. So if you had one note, you could interpolate that over 4 or 5 or 6 notes, and then you had to record another one to get the next register of the piano up there. So it was the first affordable digital keyboard, like Kurzweil and a few other folks, a company in Australia, I forget the name right now, but they had like $10,000 equipment that would allow you to do digital recording and play it back. But they sort of set the bar, and we came in with the Ensoniq, it was called the Mirage, and that came out, and we sold it for $16.95. And everybody, a lot of musicians wanted one of these Fairlights. That was called Fairlight and Kurzweil, but they were so expensive, the average musician couldn't afford them. And when we hit, it was huge success. So
yeah,
that's what happened. But it was that same architecture, the VIC product. So I used that for quite a while in my career.
And then you sold that company, right?
Yeah, we sold that we started that in, originally we were doing the Atari stuff. We were called Provincial Visions, and then we changed the name to Ensoniq in 84, and then we sold that in 98.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have, about 7 minutes left. Is there anything else you want to plug that you're doing now, or do you want to take some time?
No, I'm fine. I just keep doing it. I mean, I'm a nut. I continue to start companies.
Yeah, I'll just keep starting new businesses, so there's no end to it.
I love designing stuff. What can I say? It's what I do. But if you want to do questions or...
Yeah, questions for Al.
So you mentioned you started off designing ROMs. In retrospect, after you had designed the VIC-2, let's say, were designing ROMs really boring?
Well, the good news is it was a challenge, but it was a very straightforward design. There was only 4 or 5 parts to it, so it was you could really actually do it pretty quickly. Once you got the cell, and the cell was just a single bit, so once you knew that, it was just step and repeat. So it's just how fast could you make the address decoder work, and then the sensor to sense what the bit was. So there was really only 4 or 5 parts to the design. So it was a good thing to cut my teeth on how to make things go fast, because I needed to do that for the video stuff, okay, and the analog stuff for the color circuitry. So it was a good thing like that. Now, it wasn't boring because it was the first thing I got to do. It was mine.
Good. Another question. So the early Commodore 64s only had composite video out, and then you switched to split chroma and luma. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about that and what was driving that.
Well, driving that was if you had the full composite, you could go into a modulator, and then it would then be able to do that. The problem is that there was always interaction between the color and the video. So if you separated those, then you could actually get a little bit clearer display and crisper display, and that's why I did it. Yeah.
Al, during the development of the VIC-2, as I'm sure Dave will correct me if I get the dates wrong here, but I think it was actually the Ultimax that hit the market first, which was a VIC-2 with static RAM as opposed to DRAM. Was it originally designed for static or DRAM, and at what point did they diverge?
No, the C64 was always DRAM, okay, but the VIC-1 was static RAM, you know.
But there's the Ultimax machine, which used a derivation of the VIC-2, which used static RAM.
I don't know about that one.
Oh, okay.
I mean, basically, because I did the 16K version and then we did the 64K version, but it was it was never static.
Okay.
Okay. Maybe somebody else did one, but I wasn't involved in that.
Other very quick question. Clearly, demo groups of even now taking the VIC-2 and performing tricks with it that are just mind-blowing.
Yes.
When you kind of designed that, and you obviously had raster interrupts and stuff like that, so, clearly performing tricks halfway through, but even things like opening up the borders to put sprites on the board.
That was intended.
That wasn't.
Yes, absolutely.
I
wanted to be able to do that because I wanted to have stuff that would run off the screen.
Yeah.
Okay, and then 8 sprites. I really wanted 16, but we couldn't fit them.
Right.
Again, I was that limited to that size of the chip. Okay, so I said, okay, how do I get more movable objects? Okay, that's what I called them. Before the sprite thing, I called them MOVs, movable objects.
I'm actually surprised by that answer. I thought it was like, well, somebody just figured out that there's this stuff and they could take advantage of it, but you
No, that was intended.
planned it up. That's
Again.
that's really cool.
When it comes to the original VIC chip, I was wondering how did audio get involved into the original chip, since you said you wanted to do a video chip?
Yeah, again, it was just a boop and beep generator, essentially. Again, Bob wasn't involved in that one, but I mean, it was something that, hey, you got to be able to make some kind of a sound for a video game, right? So it really just became like a register that you could put some frequencies out, some white noise. That was basically all I did. I wasn't an audio guy, I was just video. And so you needed something, and I was just trying to mimic what the Atari 2600 and those kind of games did, where they just had the boops and beep stuff.
So I know of broadly 2 microarchitectures for doing sprites. One is the 9918 style, where you load a bunch of shift registers and then shift them out at the right time. Let's see. And the other one is the line buffer. What's going on inside the VIC-2?
What's a line buffer? Basically, what I ended up doing was I had a counter system which would then register, okay, this sprite is going to have to be put out right now. So then I would have that information. I would go out to memory and then pick up the data that needed to be displayed for that 8x8 sprite. And that's what the memory section on the board I was showing you. So it would do essentially just to compare, to say, okay, I'm on this line. Is this sprite got to be done? Go out and fetch it so the information's there and I could just pop it out. So it was internally buffered. Okay, because I couldn't get back out to memory fast enough, so I had to have it internal.
Thank you very much. You said that getting something that could do good games out was a focus for you, which is cool.
Yeah.
And it's exciting, I'm sure, to put something out there and see what people do with it. So, like, looking back to the 80s, what was a game on I assume like the VIC-2 where you just went, wow, how did they do that?
It's funny because, I mean, I love the creativity of controlling a TV set. But I have to tell you, I was not a good game designer. And I loved, like, I remember playing games on the VIC-1 type where they, the Dungeons and Dragon type of things, and, looking through dungeons and having monsters pop out and that kind of stuff. And my kids and I played the Atari, because we were doing the ROMs for the Atari, my kids had every 2600 game on the planet. But so all the kids in the neighborhood. So we played a lot of those things. But again, I was just wanted to put a really good architecture in the hands of the creative people. So there wasn't any particular design. I did like the first-person shooter type thing. Okay, so then the sprites were part of that, and there was a gun. I mean, the whole gun structure that you could have on that was the intent there. So have being first-person shooter, but actually have something in your hand. So, but no, it wasn't. I just wanted to give them a powerful platform to work on.
So I don't have a question, but I wanted to tease Albert about something.
I just dated.
We had something you didn't have. We had a 48-pin package. You only had 40 pins.
No. Yeah, we were limited to 40. Boy, I would have died for 8 more pins. 40-pin packages was all there was back then, and the old ceramic package. Yeah. I mean, the thermal problem. I mean, that was another thing on the Commodore 64. The VIC chip got so damn hot, VIC 2, that we had to figure it would die. Hey, Bill. It would die, and we had to fix because it would get too hot because 14 megahertz was really cooking back then. So we had to put this FCC shield over the whole area because it was so noisy, and it was in a case. And we came up with an idea where we literally riveted a little heat sink that came down and touched the top of the chip to keep it cool. It was one of those, how are we going to fix this? And we just found some Rube Goldberg way to make it work. Over there.
Okay, this might be coming out of left field.
That's okay.
There was a TV series called *Halt and Catch Fire*, and a lot of that, when I was listening to you speak, a lot of that seemed to be kind of where you were coming from in development, going to CES, Comdex, and things like that. Are you familiar at all with the show and have?
No, I'm not, unfortunately. I would have loved to have seen it, though. I'll have to look it up now.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Albert.